Welcome to The Bold Blueprint, a podcast for modern educators who dare to think differently. Here we explore the intersection of education and leadership, diving into bold strategies, innovative teaching, and the mindset shifts that drive real impact. Whether you're in the classroom, leading a team, or shaping the future of education, this is your space to learn, grow, and lead with confidence. Welcome to The Bold Blueprint for Modern Educators. I'm Jamie Morris, alongside my co-host Barbie, and we're going to kick off an exciting journey in the world of early childhood education. And today's introduction, very first podcast, is all about the why. How are you, Barbie?
Sorry, moving a ring light. I'm good. I'm good. Loving starting this journey with you, myself. Long time admirer. It's like, what is that? First time, long time listener, first time caller.
Oh,
got those vibes on here, and very excited. I know with which we'll talk in here, our goal and intent and our why behind not just working in the profession, but wanting to do a podcast of this nature. I'm looking forward to sharing within and also digging out some of your why.
Oh, that's really kind, Barbie. I have to tell you, I've been a massive fan of Firefly HR, particularly of yourself and, you know, your husband, James. And I think over the years, what I've been really kind of a bit of a super fan is that it's not just about what you do, but also about how you're really trying to make a difference in the sector and really thinking more creatively and support. And I don't know if anyone has followed you guys on Facebook, on Firefly HR Facebook site, and I just think it's really cool what you guys are doing. And I know when I was down in Sydney recently, and so we got to meet each other for the first time, which I felt like I've known you for so long. I wanted to really propose this idea of doing this podcast to you, and really about disrupting, you know, doing something a bit edgy and a bit different for the sector, that they can actually listen and be a bit inspired, but also kind of challenge conventional thinking as well.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I was at an event last week, and someone came up to me there that I know listens to the podcast, and they were talking about a certain part in a podcast where I lose track all the time of what I'm doing. Yeah. But they said thank you so much, because they felt seen in that moment. So the real side of it, of discussing whether it's our experiences, because we've both worked in the profession across early learning and now to school hours care, both from ground level to management, and then on the outside watching other services. So I think we've got quite a good, different, both of us experiences wise, but brings different lens to what others may want to hear about in that. And then, like I said, that person that feels seen, I don't know about you, but if you're listening to a podcast and you can connect and relate in some way, I think it makes a huge difference to how the listener, I know it does for me, feels in that moment.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, you know, you touched on something that's pretty special to me. You know, I think it is interesting. I remember starting in the sector in 1999, and I'll share a bit about why that was a bit later. But, you know, started as a Certificate 3 trainee, and, you know, in that year was really about the fact that I lost my identity of who I was, and I was called the trainee, and all my job was to clean tables and never actually do what I loved, which was actually being with the children. And, you know, over the years, I've been so fortunate that I've been able to work in every role that you can consider in this space, in the long day care setting and also outside of school hours care. And it's taken me overseas to work. And I was really proud of the work that I got to do overseas and come back. But yeah, I think you've got a similar story, right? Professionally, what have you done? What have you done?
Yeah. Before I talk on me, I do have a question, because again, we're going to see things each other says. When you said that trainee thing, did you have a name tag that said just trainee?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Don't know where that came from, that everyone didn't have their name on one. That people just had that name tag. But I'm going to go back on to myself, because I'm terrible at doing that. You might notice I will always deflect. Yeah. So a bit about my background. I knew I always wanted to work with children in some capacity. I just didn't know how. And I think there's a lot of people that maybe it's the school careers advisor that just goes, yeah, just do A or B. And you basically listen sometimes and go with that. So then I also had quite a different upbringing, and it was a year 6 teacher that kind of just made a difference in that moment in my world, especially of being a safe adult. So I knew I already had that in my experience and recollection and memories of, okay, I want to be probably like her, make a difference somehow to others. So that knocked on going to university, studying primary teaching, hated university, and then working in early childhood education whilst at university, and then falling into out of school hours care when I'd finished my degree for the hours. It suited. I looked after my grandmother at the time, so the split shifts was perfect. And then I never left out of school hours care from there, and just a beautiful profession I had no idea about. I wish the career advisors had told me a long time before that about it, but that's a bit of mine. So I think 20 years all up.
Wow. That's amazing. I think I just hit my 25-year mark, and it's kind of like, wow, that just happened. Like, you think when you're 17, 18, you're like, 25 years is such a long time away, and then you hit it and you're like, wow, that went really quickly. So what does Firefly HR do for the listeners who don't know?
And that's where I said I'm terrible at talking about ourselves. No, the main purpose, my husband and I started because I never had to use a recruitment agency myself within the profession, but I had always noticed a lot of services around us did. And we always had a lot of, say, temps turn up to our service that weren't for us, that were for another service down the road or in the next suburb. And it got me wondering why that happens. Like, where's that communication gap? What could better improve their experience? Because I'm really conscious of, say, someone like myself that didn't know about our school hours care and was going down the primary teaching route, which just what isn't for me, but that age group is perfect. If they have bad experiences, even as a temp, that could kind of lead them away from the profession as a career choice. It's when they can easily just switch and change to another profession. So I wanted to make sure those experiences were better from the get-go. Especially in out of school hours care in New South Wales, there's no qualification requirement. So it could be a uni student studying law. And some of my best educators were those uni students studying law.
I remember there were some educators who used to be mining students, and they were the best.
Yeah. Someone said to me it was like their break because it was so different to what they're studying, that they were just so switched on and on. Whereas I found for me, studying teaching, but then going and working in a job related, it's almost like the same thing, although I love it, but it's a long time doing the same thing. That's me getting sidetracked there. So, it all kind of snowballed from there, wanting to create better experiences for temps. I looked in recruitment, then got asked to do some professional development, and I get very nervous, so never my goal to do anything like that. I do love supporting services and consulting, and we've built on from there. Always conscious of being that educator that may not have access to things. I didn't always have access, because I was a temp as well myself. So pretty conscious of putting out free resources or content or low cost so that it's still accessible, whether your workplace pays for it or not, or in some way. But I'm sure there's more. That's my...
No, I think it's amazing. I think for myself at Early Learning Management, I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and we're a national organisation. And as I said, I've been doing this for about 25 years, working in every role. And I've worked in the corporate space overseas, in the USA, in Southeast Asia, and here in Australia as well. And I think over the years, I kind of lost my way with that big corporate mentality. But I've got the experience behind me with that. So I found Early Learning Management about 2 years ago. And the interesting thing is that the organization's got about 30 years, exposure to the sector. But what Early Learning Management does is, I believe, individual owners are the unsung heroes in the sector. I think there's a big emphasis on the big players, like, the big names that are out there, and they quite often get all the spotlight for all the different things. But I believe that the individual small providers, you actually see a lot of better quality aspects happening. The quality ratings in those small providers are do far exceed those bigger players, and staff retention is typically longer in those smaller players as well. And that's not, a blanket rule, because there are exceptions to the rule, but early learning management helps those individual small providers who might have one or two, maybe even 10 services around the nation. So we're a nationwide organization, and we do all of the operation manager support, quality, compliance, all of the payroll, bookkeeping, everything you can consider from a big organization, but helping to devise and customize the individual support for those individual approved providers and those nominated supervisors, center managers. We know, my God, many years ago, I remember there was no such thing as many years ago, back in my day, there was, no such thing as an ed leader, and the 2IC was on the floor, and, there was myself being the nominated supervisor. It wasn't even the term in those days before the national quality standards in 2010. And I remember just being that person by myself. And I remember it was in Balmain that I worked, and I always had a sense of wanting to be part of a connection of a community, even though I was by myself. And I remember in that role, about 2007, I want to say, I contacted all of the local centres and said, "Hey, I'm Jamie. I'm the centre director in this service. Do you want to be part of a group?" And we ended up creating around Balmain, about 15 different services came together to monthly meet. And I used to get guest stars and, different workshops occurring for the different centre managers. So I've always had within me to feel connected as part of a collaborative kind of supportive group. And when I went into the corporate setting, I felt part of that sense of community, but also the corporate setting, sometimes the biggest emphasis is really on occupancy drivers, wage to revenue, driving the profitability. And I think there's full respect to that, and I fully understand that there's a space for that. But I think what I am really proud of at Early Learning Management, it is about that, but it's more than that. It's really about customizing that uniqueness of that lived community and that lived experience. So, I'm really lucky, and I feel really privileged that I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and I help to oversee early learning management in a variety of ways. So yeah, that's a bit about what I do. But I think, I don't know, we were talking a little bit as well. I think while we're talking professionally about our roles, I think, I think it's a bit deeper than that for us as well, right? I think I'm very much, driven by, values and my personal mission in my life, and I think what I'm I got pretty aligned with you about is that, yes, there's podcasts, yes, there's different things like that, but I think, my start in my life didn't start easy, and I think that was the same for yourself, right?
Yeah.
I think, going into a bit of the thing, and I'm sure over further episodes we could definitely share a bit more about that, but just a bit surface level. I grew up in Wollongong, working class family. Parents, weren't the best parents, didn't really have, the skills to be what a parent is. And I think in the 80s there wasn't, the internet and different support groups. And my parents were we all lived in housing commission, and came from a low socio-economic space. No one in my family anyone had ever gone to a university or even a qualification level. My dad came to Australia as a 10-pound pom, coming over and, migrated to Australia with his parents and his siblings. And then met my mum. Lo and behold, what they didn't realize when they had me is that they didn't really want a son. That wasn't great to grow up in that kind of environment. I have two sisters that I don't talk to very much at all, but they loved the fact that they had girls, but they never really wanted a male, which is really unnormal in a conventional thinking, where you kind of think, in society, it's like you want a boy, and that was, and that's okay. But, my dad wasn't anything of an ideal parent. He was quite abusive and quite often would say that he didn't want me, and I was quite neglected at home, didn't really get fed, and didn't have all those things that most children have from a safety and security perspective. And when I was 11, my mum had a stroke, and I actually saved her life. That was quite intense. My dad was a bit out of the picture about a year before that, but that moment in time brought him back into the picture, and um, that was not a great experience. And so, being an 11-year-old to 12-year-old boy in year five and year six, it was quite a turbulent time for me. And halfway through my year six, I was severely abused by my dad, and I ended up getting taken away from my father and my mum. And then I ended up going through the court system and became what's called a state of the award, a state of the award, and that is where the department is your primary caregiver. And from that moment on, I was then deemed to be a homeless person. And I ended up moving from Wollongong to Sydney with my grandparents. That didn't go well. 3 weeks before my 13th birthday, they called the department and said, if you don't find him a home by this afternoon, he's on the street. And I think that really resonates with me around the importance of why and what I do, because a lot of people think homelessness is about, you're on the street with a sleeping bag, and that's actually not what homelessness is. Homelessness is that you aren't able to live with your primary caregiver, and there's people who are paid to look after you, and there's a variety of different ways that young people are taken care of in Australia, and I do salute the different support. I still think there's a lot of different things that people could do, but throughout my teenage life, I was always trying to find the next place to live. I had caseworkers. I lived in multiple refuges. I lived in a foster care scenario, and that was awful.
Yeah.
But I think throughout my high school life, that's really a time when you really understanding your identity of who you are and your place in the world when you are, you're about to finish year 12. And that wasn't really my focus. My focus was really about getting through the day and, dealing with a lot of the issues that I had in my formative years of not feeling the most amount of love and security. But my safe space was school. And I guess this brings it back into my why. And while this all sounds very awful and traumatic, and when I do share this story, Barbie, I say this sometimes, that I don't often be as exposed and as vulnerable to share this, because it can make the listener who I share feel uncomfortable. But I think looking back, I'm actually in a weird way grateful, because it has transformed me into the person that I am today. Throughout high school, I had one teacher, and my teacher was Miss Conti, and I hope she gets to listen to this podcast. And if we need to do this recording again, I will definitely share the story. But Miss Conti was my drama teacher. I'd gone through a couple of high schools, and it was a high school in Bankstown, 90% Muslim Lebanese people, and the other percentile was of Asian demographic. And in my class, there was probably like 3 or 4 Caucasians. I was one of those. And, so even my identity in that school didn't fit as compared to the community as well. And going into high school, I didn't really want to go to class. It wasn't really for me. I just wanted to be with people and feel a sense of connection. But Miss Conti really saw something in me, and she was always available to me during morning tea and lunch breaks, even though I probably bothered her during her break time. She always was there for me, and she was a drama teacher. And what I didn't realize now, looking back, is that drama teaching and drama class actually helped me in so many ways. It helped me to express myself, be vulnerable, public speak in front of others, think on my feet, and do all these different things. But what I realized after I finished year 12, because when you're a ward of the state, when you turn 18, there goes all of the kind of funding, and off you go. So, I had to kind of fend for myself, and I needed to get money. So I needed to find a home and pay my own rent and find my own way. And I really wanted to be Miss Conti. I wanted to be the version of her. She inspired me so much, and she gave me a sense of identity and a sense of belonging, and a sense of care that I wanted to go to university, but I couldn't afford it. So then I started going through the paper. I don't know if you remember this. It was actually in the Northern Beaches in DY that I lived with a group called Burdekin. And I remember getting the Manly Daily, good old newspaper you get on a daily basis, and there was all the jobs. And in the job section, I'd get out a red marker, circle, call the phone numbers, and cross it out if it wasn't the right fit. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I did see a job that said no experience necessary, work with children, um, a free qualification, which was the traineeship. And I circled that and I was like, wow, like I don't even know if I like children when I was an 18-year-old guy. I was like, I've never really been around child except for being one myself, and that wasn't a great experience. But I was like, this is pretty cool. Maybe I could try this out to see if actually children was something that I could be around. And I called the number, and then, I spoke to my friend, and I didn't have any kind of clothes, but I thought based on Year 10 commerce, you should wear a suit and a tie to go to an interview.
Yeah.
So I borrowed his suit and tie, and I went to Seaforth, is where the centre was, in a Mason building, an old building that you used to have to pack away and set up every day because it was also run by the Masons. And I showed up and I walked up the stairs, opened the door, saw the centre manager. She looked me up and down and she just said, "What are you doing? Like, take that jacket and tie off. We just want to see if you want to be with children and how that goes." And what I didn't realize, Barbie, and I know this is a bit of a long story, but what I didn't realize is that it was a bit of an audition. So they actually had about 10 others. And this is in the world where there was a lot of educators. They were all applying for roles, not in this day and age. But there was 10 other applicants, and everyone was asked to go into the hall and be with children and see what that was like. So I went into the drawing space, and I remember sitting down, and the children just started one by one, started to gravitate towards me. And they just asked me over and over and over to draw pictures for them. And I remember the clouds and the flowers, the smiley faces that I was putting on those clouds and those flowers, and they just kept asking me. And I remember in that moment going, "This is special." And what I didn't realize, I was there for 2 hours drawing those dang clouds and flowers, and people were kind of literally being tapped on the shoulder saying, "Thank you so much. We'll be in touch." And then off they went. But I was the only one left, and I ended up getting that role. And I really thought, wow, I could really make a difference to children. Maybe they're not having a great home life that nobody knows about. And I could actually be someone who could actually, maybe make them happy and do things to make a difference. And those images of those pictures I was giving them, the joy in their face, I was like, wow, that's so amazing. And maybe I could be like this Conti. I ended up getting that role. And as I said at the start, that ended up becoming a transformative year for me because it was such an awful year, because the reason why they wanted to hire trainees because I was paid $5.25 per hour. And that's why they wanted trainees, because of the low cost of that. And yeah, and then that year I ended up, losing my identity. I was no longer called Jamie anymore. I was called the trainee. And that year was the year I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to be better than you. I'm going to dive into this world called leadership, and I'm going to go through every single role as an assistant, as a room leader, as a break cover, as a cook, as assistant manager, center manager, multi-site manager, and do every aspect so I could continue to learn to be the best version of myself, to help support people in different ways, be it children, educators, families, leadership, whatever it is. And I'm really lucky that it's taking me on that pathway. And I look at other people in other sectors, and I see people doing other sectors, but I've never worked in any other sector. I've done different roles, but I could never imagine in my life not working in this space. I feel really lucky and privileged to be able to do that. As I tell the story, it brings me back to my childhood, and I'm hoping in some way across the years I've made at least a little. I know it sounds a bit silly, but I do hope that I've made a difference in some way. And this podcast for me, I hope there can be some reach, that we guest speakers that we bring on, Barbie, that we can bring some people on that can maybe bring a bit of inspiration for whatever the listeners' lived experience is as well. This podcast is brought to you by Early Learning Management, ELM, a holistic, comprehensive management company dedicated to supporting early childhood services and approved providers, from operations and compliance to financial strategy and growth. We provide expert solutions right around the nation so you can focus on what matters most, delivering quality early education. Learn more at elm.net.au.
Yeah, even I wrote down me writing is certain things you say as well, but what you mentioned there too, that bringing people on, whether they're notable people that everyone may have heard of, or that person that feels like you did as the trainee, giving them a voice, giving them a platform to feel included in some way, help also stop turning them away from the profession. Because first off, actually, sorry, I got not sidetracked on that, but thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I know off air I'd asked Jamie a bit if he's shed much before, and I know you said not always a lot. So I know that can also be a different journey to go on. But for anyone that's listening, I'm sure there's lots of people that would connect with, whether it's parts, because you had a lot, certain
Yeah.
parts of your story.
Yeah.
And I know for myself as well, sometimes seeing people on the other side of it can be such a motivator to keep going in their own world. Like it could be just that a bad moment on a bad day, and just hearing someone else talk, say to yourself, can help switch them on a different trajectory in a positive way. So your impact's probably bigger than you realize just with making that type of shared story public just then. But
Thank you. Thank you.
uh,
I do appreciate that. But I mean, I'm interested to hear, what about you?
yeah, so you mentioned it too, about that like safe place, like so school was your safe place, and I think it's important. I told you I'm going to deflect from me. I'm about to go talk about other
I
people.
know, I know.
Um, in a service, whether early learning, USH, anyone else listening that might be from another profession that works with maybe indirectly or with children, safety isn't a given. Don't worry if mum and dad, not don't worry, but if mum and dad come in polish as such, and you might think, yep, perfect family, don't just have in your mind that safety is a given. Neglect can look different in all different families. I've worked in like pretty affluent areas versus lower socioeconomic areas, and just the difference in how children feel on a neglect sense can be exactly the same. Obviously, different levels of needs that might be happening, but it's just not a given. And I think that's what educators, it's not to be sus on everyone, I don't mean that, but just in a sense of you don't know what that child's been through, you don't know how their night was, you don't know if mum and dad fought, you don't know any of these little things. You don't know if they've been trying to talk to mum all morning and she's ignored them, scrolling on her phone.
Yeah.
There's just so much. But again, I'm not talking my story. So my story is similar, but not similar, but similar in a sense of those transformative years. Quite a different upbringing to most to come across. And you mentioned it, and I know we talked about it off the air. I asked if you ever find people get uncomfortable when you tell a bit of your story, because I find people do, and it makes you tell maybe this much instead of this much.
Yeah.
But we lived it. It's a bit different on our side, and I've got to remember that those people listening that may have had the same experience. But yeah, very different family life. Dad was in jail when I was born. Didn't really know who he was. Mum was very different. My name, she called me Barbie, out of touch with reality. And I think even when I was 2 weeks old, she just started disappearing. So when you were talking about that homelessness state, I'm like, oh gosh, okay, I've been like that since 2 weeks old and never really thought about it. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I had to count because I keep losing count of them all. And I heard you mention before you don't really talk to your sisters, and I know you can get people that meet you and they're like, oh, how can you not talk to your siblings? I know what it's like. I've got 7 and definitely don't talk to them all. There's just all different reasons. And then on and off living just wherever. It's almost like just wherever you're told to go that week. I don't have a lot of memories, and it's probably a good thing from under 10. Do get the odd memories now. I'm a mum, and with my first, she's a girl, or not even memories, feelings. Um, and then they come at weird times, like if I'm supporting her with one of her needs, meeting a need, like if she's hungry and get her food, especially if she was young, that would bring this weird feeling of like, oh, what happened when I was young? Those feelings. But yeah, around a lot of bad places to and from. I might have been shipped off to grandma's here and there, and then back to mum whenever she decided to pop her back around. I'm very grateful to have a best friend since I was around 4, who I'm still best friends with. Hi, Lauren. I should embarrass you in these. And her mum was best friends with my grandmother, so it was almost like a safe refuge, being able to go see her, visit her on weekends, a different family life. And then, yeah, you talked about kind of being is it not someone of the state or anything? I know at 11 I refused to live with my mum, and I say I was emancipated, not legally through the courts because she wouldn't go. She'd just keep disappearing. But in the same sense of it's like you just live wherever from then. I remember I lived on my own for 3 months, I think at 15, and it's just, yeah, when you're that type of person, because I know now on the other side, if I heard that another child doing that, I'd be like, what? How? It's just
Totally.
there wasn't those supports, was there, or
Yeah.
accessible, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it led me a lot to question now as we're older too, even talking to other charities that support children, like, but how does a child access that charity if their parent won't approve it? Because there's a lot like that. The parent has to approve it, whereas my mum was in denial there was even an issue, so
Yeah.
would never approve access to things. Um, and I'm probably missing a whole chunk in there 'cause definitely a lot happened. But that year 6 teacher who kind of, she just made sure I had the little things without her. It wasn't anything big to her. It was normal. I actually got to teach for her later. So yours is Miss Conti. Conti, am I
Yeah, Miss
saying it right?
Conti. Yeah.
Mine was Mrs. Sumpton, who I believe only retired last year. But yeah, it was a good 360 moment being able to teach for her later on. Only briefly casual because I fell into out of school hours care. But she just made it like things accessible, like uniform or the year 6 excursion people go on, or even like I think I had to go to zone or something for running. That's just things that I couldn't go to. Like, who's going to take me? They organized it. I never had to think about anything, um, or even uniform or the like mufti days, just those little things that would really, and I'm probably, you probably had the same feelings that I really used to get a bit anxious about, but
Yeah.
also it depended what school I went to because I moved around a lot. Some of the schools would put a lot of pressure on you as the child, like, why don't
Yeah.
you have this? Well, I don't know, I'm 5. Ask a
Yeah.
parent. Like, or like, yeah. So even then, that knock on to wanting to not have kids feel like that, I guess, was always a goal as I was older. I, opposite, I hated high school myself. I was always in trouble. Um,
I
I
was also
think
in trouble as well.
I like here's another month of detention. It's
Yes,
okay.
yes, yes, yes. I
Like
didn't go to loan,
like
remember?
oh well, like I would have liked someone in high school to click on it sometime. Like, maybe something's not right at home. But
Yeah.
they never they never did.
Yeah.
And then just persevered to get uni. Out to work 5 jobs to try and get through. Was full-time care of my grandmother as well and full-time study. Proud that I only took, I think, a year longer to do my study in the end. And then, yeah, the going to uni, working 5 jobs, some of which was early childhood education, and it's still just loved it. Loved working with children. Like you said, you had that first experience of walking in that room and noticing children coming over. I find children just, they're so easy in a sense of there's no well, sometimes there's a gender. I was about to say there's no agenda. Sometimes there is. It's like, I want that chocolate or something.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
you know
yeah.
what I mean? There's no malice often behind it all. They're genuine. They haven't got all this lived experience that's made them a bitter adult or
Yes,
anything
yes.
like that. So it's a big part of what I love supporting. But I also found that I actually loved working with probably what you would call the trainees, the newer staff to the profession, especially. I had a lot of under 18s
Mm.
working with us, and just encouraging them in that space, and that time, because a lot is going on, whether or not at home, there's just hormones and everything that can go
Yeah.
on. So being that place for them as a workplace as well, I loved, and a lot are now directors themselves, and I'm proud of them all. For any of them listening, very proud. Of anyone I've worked with that's now a leader in the space, especially if I stole them from another profession. And that was always a goal. Like, yes, oh, you think you're studying whatever you're studying. Like,
Yes.
I think one was astrophysics, who's now a director. I'm like, yes.
That's fantastic.
This episode is brought to you by Firefly HR, education and care recruitment and consulting done differently. If you're looking for passionate education and care leaders or your next opportunity in the sector, Firefly HR connects the right people with the right roles. Visit fireflyhr.com.au to learn more.
No, I think, Barbie, honestly, thank you for sharing. There's so many similarities around things, and I think it is true. The like reliving those experiences, and I think for listeners out there, we hope that this doesn't bring any kind of responses, and hopefully there is a support network around you to hear that. But I think the intent of sharing both of our stories is about our why and why we do what we do. That it isn't just about doing this as a job, but actually, given our stories, we're both very much our North Star is to make the most amount of impact. And this idea that we want to kind of unpack over this podcast series, which is disrupting the sector and being able to make people think in a different way of not just what is in front of us. And I think one thing that resonates with me, with you, Barbie, is, and I guess my story as well, is there was a teacher that saw something. And in our space, sometimes we're so bogged down in around paperwork and our team dynamics and who we're working with, and the tea towel wasn't put in the right spot, or the light switches aren't turned off, and we're so focused on that we forget that we have a duty to give every child an experience in our service, to really give them something that's a bit brighter. Just even if it's one thing per day, getting to know who they are. And we don't have to dive in. We're not child protection. That's not what we do. But we are an extension of families, communities sometimes. And we don't have to go down the pathway of knowing every intricate detail of their home life, but even the families' lives. But even if we give a good access to good, high quality care, is, I believe, our duty and our responsibility to do that. And I think in this day and age in the sector, there's a lot of those Facebook groups, and I see them, Barbie, I don't need to do, but they're the anonymous posts, and there's quite a negative connotation in our sector about a variety of things. And let's be honest, it's not easy. I have my personal perspectives on the way team members are being trained. There are some great RTOs out there. There really is. Shout out to all the great RTOs. But even recently, a SEEK sent out a notification that some qualifications were now deregistered because they weren't meeting standards. And I think we now need to think differently with training our team members in-house, and of course doing formalized training of Cert 3 diplomas and ECTs. But what does that experience look like? And I even think our leadership team, people don't get trained how to be leaders. They're usually really great room leaders or really great, 2ICs, and they want to become the center manager, and they become the center manager and they're dealing with real complex problems. They're even working out how to roster and how to think about understanding everyone's needs and, working through everyone else's professional development journey. But no one actually teaches them how to be a center manager. And I think, how hard is that, and how difficult is that? And people then start exploring ways to show up every day. And I think sometimes even the leaders of the leaders, they've not been trained. So we're actually in this bubble in the sector now, I think, where there is a lot of misinformation and different ways of where to prioritize. And with the big corporates, when there is a big push around the numbers and the business aspect, and yes, we should, because it is a business at the end of the day, but what is the thing that can make that community and that center so unique that it actually builds occupancy and staff want to be there because of what is happening in those classrooms and what those team dynamics have? That's my personal perspective, and kind of starting to get people to challenge the thinking of their everyday experience, because there's some centers that do it so well, but there is a large proportion of the sector that I think is very fragmented.
Yep. And it's that part where I just wrote a blog on something similar yesterday. I'm conscious of time, but what we're projecting out there of the profession can be a big impact on the future profession, even if it's in a workplace, if you're not happy. But if children can pick that up on you, they're not going to want to be an educator. Why? Like, what are we showing them? Like, I know there's other factors involved, like monetary and conditions and all that, but this is just purely from a joy perspective.
Yeah.
If they're not picking up on that, out of school hours care even more because the children are older. But I mean, my child's 5. She can tell a lot already. I'm fascinated. I know
Yes,
I
yeah.
already knew a lot for 20 years, but see, having my daughter and just what she picks up all the
Yeah.
time. Oh my gosh. I don't mean to educate anyone. Like she can tell if like one of us if we're busy, or she might even say if I'm angry, if I'm just like trying to reply to an email. Not angry, just that concentration. It's just
Yeah.
they're sponges. And they're observant sponges. So it's that mindset of what I feel bad calling them observant sponges, but you know what I mean? Like, what are we
Yeah,
projecting
totally. Yeah.
to them? And then even publicly, if I was in high school right now, so if I listen to media, not that anyone in high school does, they're probably on TikTok, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I'm not seeing anything positive, why would I choose it as a profession?
I totally agree. I
Like,
totally agree. And I think this podcast, I think we've got some great guest
yeah,
speakers to explore this. I think we're talking about different tracks of, leadership, resourcing, people who've done the role before. We're also talking about even non-sector, people who don't work in the sector, and how they've gone through adversity and actually created some great stuff, right?
yeah. Yeah, and then like I think we had a goal, like as mentioned at the start, it didn't matter where you're on your journey, whether new or experienced, even if you're questioning if it's for you, we just want people to feel included, hooked as well, because and kind of ready to, I guess, whether it's needed or not, unlearn and relearn. A lot has changed from, I mean, from what I got taught at university was terrible in regards to special education. I do that because
Yeah.
that's what they called the unit, which I failed twice, and I have ADHD and got told I was wrong on an ADHD assignment. But anyways, that's another story. So we want all of them, and guess make those ongoing meaningful changes. Doesn't mean that our practice is wrong. It's just things change, our knowledge change. I mean, neuroscience is and what we've learned there in the last
I'm so fascinated about
yeah
that.
yeah
The first 5 years, the first 1,000 days of a child's life in our sector is so critical. It's so meaningful. Children cannot and will not learn more than they ever will again
yeah
after the first 10 years of life because of the neuroconnections and the myelination, which is the emotions of
yeah
cementing the learning. It's actually so interesting that children should have a joyous experience because they then associate feelings with learning outcomes. So if
yeah
people are feeling that they don't like math is non-emotional, but it's the experience that they've had about learning math. And that's why when we think about a holistic curriculum in our space, we want to give that positive experience so they have that connection of joy.
Yeah, and I mentioned before I don't remember much for under 10, and that's why I'm also very passionate on this area because
Yeah.
adults don't realize that impact they can have. And now, as an adult, nearly 40, I've got so many issues whether it's the parasympathetic nervous system that's just doing whatever
Yeah.
it wants, like
Yeah.
and it's all coming from this. So there's so much we can help change in people's lives, and just that adding to that, even just their self-esteem, like the future
Well,
adults.
Barbie, we've got about one more minute.
Yes, yes, I'll stop
Every
talking.
podcast, we're going to have a question, right? And the one question we're going to ask every person who comes onto this podcast that we're going to interview, the question we're going to ask is, what was the very first live show that you ever saw? Where were you? What was the memory and everything? So I'm going to ask you, Barbie, what was the first live show you ever saw?
So I'm lucky I've got the same best friend since 4 because she remembers what I don't. But I want to say the first live show I saw was with her in 1999, and it was The Offspring.
Oh, wow.
I think I was 14, and I believe we went with her dad. I could be wrong, and I'll ask her because I'm going to a concert with her this weekend, seeing Cornet, Good Things. Very excited. But I think that was my first one, and the memories you get, amazing. What was your first live show performance?
The first live show, so I want you to picture 1990s, and there's people who weren't even born who might be listening that weren't even born there. But 1990s music scene for me was so awesome. Like, we want to talk about therapy. Therapy for me was music,
Yep.
the songwriting, the lyrics, and everything. And I was obsessed with Alanis Morissette. And so Alanis Morissette went to Homebush. And she performed, and I was right up front. She sang "Jagged Little Pill." It was after her second album, and I knew every single lyric. The cost for the ticket was $75. I remember that. How cheap is that? And I was with two friends. And I just remember that show so well. I had never been to a live show, and it transformed my life. To this day, any kind of live performance I can ever go and see, I'm right there at front, and it's got all of my attention because I just think, wow, for people to pour their heart and soul and their life in front of so many people in such a way that Alanis Morissette did for me, I was just like, phew, it was so special.
Yeah, and you see it in your eyes when you think about it, and that's what we wanted to elicit with that type of question. I know when we were talking off air on it, so what's a picture, what's a question that will help with a positive childhood memory? And we're both like, lol. Like,
Yeah, no.
with us, we're like, okay, let's do this. Like, what's your
Let's do
favorite
it.
family holiday? What family holiday? Don't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
it. So
totally.
this is hopefully a bit different and can relate somehow to everyone on that in some sense. Well, I think we've done pretty good for our first episode. I'm
I think
terrible
it's
at
not been
rounding
bad.
out.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
No, thank you. I definitely got lots more I think we should talk about spinning off from all that. I encourage anyone that listens to also give feedback on they want to hear, because I guess at the end of
Yes,
the
please.
day, we're here for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So please, we'd love to hear from everyone listening. If there's a guest speaker, if there's a topic, if there's anything you want us to cover, we'd be gladly be able to customize that for you. This is about you while we're talking about ourselves. The intent is to help support everyone around the sector. But I'm so excited, Barbie. I can't wait to see where this journey takes us.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. Thanks for thinking of it. I was not
Yeah.
expecting it. I was very flattered. I think I didn't even have an answer for you at the time. I was like, oh.
No. Yeah, I know. But
So
we,
thank
we
you.
worked through it. All
Yes.
right. Well, I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to The Bold Blueprint.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to us on
elm.net.au or
fireflyhr.com.au.
bye.
Bye.